very short this time, but it's always good to be back in Washington.
You going to have to spend any time at the SEC while you're here this time?
Maybe a photo op? No, I'm kidding. No planned visits to the SEC. But I would welcome that. I mean, honestly, I think an open dialogue between industry and the SEC would be a step forward from where we are now.
Well, of course, what we're all referring to, and I think everyone in this room pretty much knows what I'm talking about, is the SEC case, which a judge ruled in your favor around XRP and whether or not it was improperly issued as a security. Are we calling that done and dusted, or are you bracing yourself for some kind of remedy or appeal process?
Well, look, I think the SEC clearly lost on everything that matters. There is a remedy process which continues forward. There's the unknown, and I know Chair Gensler is on stage later. You should ask him if they're going to appeal. That would be great. Look, that's not a knowable thing. From my point of view, they lost on the things they care most about. But by the same token, if they move it up the appellate ladder, it becomes more amplified as a decision of consequence. And so it'll be interesting. I think there's a strategic trade-off. I'm sure there's way more lawyers in this room than I'm comfortable, that you guys know more about it than I do. But I think it's to be determined whether or not I choose to appeal. I think regardless of whether they appeal, I feel really good about it. I think it's very clear the SEC now they lost 3 times with Ripple. They lost, I know the CEO of Grayscale is on, they lost the Grayscale case. And by the way, these are federal judges saying things, I'll quote Grayscale. The judge said that the SEC was being arbitrary and capricious. I mean, this is damning language from a federal judge. I also happen to believe, as long as I'm on a roll here, look, at some point when you have you keep trying to do the same thing and you keep having the same outcome, at some point you change your approach. What I hope it would be magical if Chair Gensler got up here and said, hey, we're going to change our approach. We have lost time and time and time again, so let's step back. Apparently, we haven't had it right because the judicial branch is saying we keep getting it wrong. And so it would be great to have that constructive dialogue. I would be happy to go to the SEC today.
Okay.
Actually, today would be tough. But
yeah, I know he has to get on a flight to Dubai in a couple of hours, so we'll pass the message along to Chair Gensler when he arrives.
I would come back from Dubai here to meet with Chair Gensler.
Okay. On the record, he says this. So you mentioned that there was a win in the Ripple case and in the Grayscale case, or a loss on the other hand for the SEC. But of course, those aren't the only high-profile cases the SEC is currently pursuing. They've brought cases against Binance, against Coinbase. Does the Ripple case teach us anything about what might happen in those cases? How do you view the debate around XRP in the context of those cases?
Look, I've followed the Coinbase case a little more closely, and so maybe I can comment there a little bit more. I think that the challenge has been, and again, even if you read or listen to what the judge has said in some of the early Coinbase procedural stuff, the SEC is not trending well there. And again, if at some point you would think if you keep getting losses, you would say, okay, wait a minute, let's step back, let's reevaluate, or even better, let's be part of championing a legislative solution. Let's not go to Congress and testify and say, the laws are clear. The laws clearly could be much clearer at a minimum. And, I think what we're seeing in the Coinbase case, the world is not just a simple Howey test. And we have seen some momentum around legislative solutions. Obviously, Washington, it's hard to get things passed in Washington. In some ways, that's a good thing. In some ways, that's bad. But I'm hopeful that in 2024, we do see some legislative momentum that actually does provide that clarity. And it would be a magical thing if the SEC were part of that, working constructively with the industry to find that right path.
Well, you say you're hopeful that something happens legislatively, but ultimately the way things are going right now, do you think more clarity is likely to come from Congress, or is it just going to continue to come from the courts and the judicial branch?
I think that's a question for Chair Gensler. I mean, right now, he has taken an approach of your regulation through enforcement. That is not in my judgment, constructive way to regulate. Look, one of the things is most frustrating about this, I mean, Ripple spent well over $150 million defending that case. There is no recourse. So, the case was brought by Bill Hinman and Jay Clayton. Bill Hinman and Jay Clayton, Jay Clayton left office the next day.
Right.
It just feels a little bit like this was not there's just no recourse to the SEC. There's no negative outcome for anyone. And I think it's really, really confusing to me when Bill Hinman got up to the world in 2018 and said, ETH is not a security. And now we know from the litigation with Ripple that the SEC's general counsel even said, this is going to make things less clear. This isn't following the Howey test. So, it feels a little bit, and I think there should be, some call to accountability and even an investigative work. Like, why would we take an approach of putting Ripple on the defense if we got to spend $150 million to show that the law actually doesn't say what they're saying, and then in another case say, okay, we think this one's clear. Like, the government should not be picking winners and losers.
So as we talk about this litigation, do you think if there is an appeal in your case or in one of the other cases we've talked about, that ultimately this ends up with the Supreme Court, that this goes all the way to the top?
I think that definitely could happen. I mean, certainly, we've said this publicly, we are in it till the end.
So you'd take it to SCOTUS?
100%. By the way, again, there's a lot of lawyers in this room. That is a good thing. I mean, the current Supreme Court, we'd love to see the Vegas odds on how that would go.
They haven't been super friendly to regulators, I think is what you're alluding to.
They have not been friendly to regulators, no. And so, and that goes back to my earlier point. I don't know if the SEC will choose to appeal this decision. If they do, I think it risks to them amplifying, something that they're not yet saying. I think it'd be more constructive for the SEC and even the industry just to say, look, okay, let's step back, let's reevaluate. As you know, I'm going from here to Dubai. Other regulators around the world, we have been in this dialogue. I've been talking to other regulators around the world for years, and there's an open dialogue. There's a constructive dialogue. The U.S. used to be looked at as a leader from securities regulation and protecting consumers. I think it's become a political liability. The way the SEC has approached this in the United States, we are looked at here in the U.S. relative to other countries as stuck. We are not leading, and even worse, it's just kind of looked at. The other countries are absolutely leading. The UK. I mean, I happen to be going to the UAE later today, but I could name 5 or 6 countries: Japan, even Australia, Switzerland, Singapore. I mean, these are all countries that are leading, and by virtue of that, you're seeing capital investment. You're seeing entrepreneurs set up shop in those countries because the rules are clear.
I want to come back to that rest of the world versus the U.S. point, but just to clarify something quickly, because you just said you'll take it to the Supreme Court if you have to. You will ride this out, fight it in the court until it is done if the SEC appeals. There's no chance that you would end up settling in some way.
Well, that's a slightly different question. I mean, look, we've talked a little bit about this publicly now. I was offered the ability to settle prior to they didn't just sue Ripple, they sued me.
Yes.
And they sued
dropped
Larson.
that now, right?
That has all been all dropped with prejudice. And so, look, that feels really good. Asterisk. It feels like, how did we end up here? Like, what you sued me as if it was clear I had to knowingly know that XRP was a security and act recklessly to not know. Again, people here in the law know more about this than I do, but there was no chance they were going to win that. And pushing it the way they did, it just feels like the SEC should be part of the solution. Other countries, it's no problem. And you joke, I mean, I think you were joking to my meeting with the SEC today. In another country, that wouldn't. I've met with central banks. I've met with, you name the regulator, and it's kind of like, yeah, no problem. An open meeting, open dialogue. We talk about what Ripple's doing. We talk about our view on the crypto industry. No problem. Here in the U.S., it's like, oh, the laws are clear, but yet we can't answer, is ETH a security?
Yeah, that's something that the chairman has still not actually
I don't know
expressed
if you're
an opinion
today,
on.
But ask him again today.
Maybe I'll find him behind the curtain somewhere. I'll let you know. Okay, so let's go back to the U.S., the rest of the world topic, as you were just discussing it there. Where do you think the best example is being set? What should the U.S. be trying to replicate? Or does the U.S. just need to be doing something different but taking that regulatory approach differently?
I partly because they're a close economic and political partner to the U.S. The United Kingdom, the UK, I think has been very constructive on crypto, and that when I say that, they're not. Again, Chair Gensler likes to talk about crypto as the Wild West. It is absolutely not the Wild West. Ripple is a regulated company in many jurisdictions around the world. In Singapore, we have our license from MAS as a major payments provider. In the UK, we have, in Dubai, we've applied for the virtual asset regulatory, VARA, I can't remember what the A stands for. But, it's not the Wild West, and I think it's a narrative to promote, I guess, a political agenda as opposed to sound policy. And, I think there's still time for the U.S. to remain a key leader in this space. And some of the most important crypto companies in the world are based here in the United States. But, if Brian Armstrong were up here today, I think he would say as well, does he wish he had gone public in a different jurisdiction in the United States? And the SEC approved his S-1, but then sued him for doing things they knew he was doing. How does that make sense?
Okay, so you just said you think there is still time for the U.S. to be a leader. How much time is still time?
Yeah.
Where in the hourglass are we?
Well, I mean, look, I want to be realistic about this. The United States is, 23% of global GDP. If the U.S. gets its act together years from now, it's such an important economic actor that it feels like that option always exists because of where the U.S. stands in a global GDP point of view. And it is really the finance capital of the world. But there are other finance capitals of the world. And certainly Dubai is, trying to emerge even more so. Singapore for sure, London for sure. And not surprisingly, I've said publicly, 80% of Ripple's hiring this year will be outside the United States. And it's partly because, why would I want to hire more and more people in the United States when the U.S. is making it hostile for me to operate here? And even with the SEC case, I mean, we have U.S. banks as customers. And, I've talked to them post the SEC case, and I'd say, okay, so great, now we have a product called on-demand liquidity, which uses XRP. And so I'll go to those banks and say, should we engage on that topic? And they're like, look, even though you won the case, the United States government is still hostile towards crypto. The OCC is hostile towards crypto. And until that changes, the banks in the United States are not going to engage meaningfully. So I don't think the window has passed for the U.S. to be a leader. But I think every day that goes by, these other markets, they want the entrepreneurs there. They want growth. And, again, I'm mentioning Singapore, London, and Dubai as three key examples. But, I mean, the Ripple's London office is our second largest office.
Well, that's a really good point. And to your point of you're hiring a lot internationally, these are long-term decisions you're making. These are long-term investments. So even if things were to get friendlier in the U.S., would you all of a sudden shift back here? How are you thinking about the long term for Ripple? Well,
look, I mean, a majority of our employees are still U.S. based. I think eventually, if you zoom out far enough, none of this stuff barely existed 10 or 12 years ago.
Fair.
So if you zoom out far enough, do I think 10 years from now the U.S. is going to figure this out and have a constructive regulatory framework for crypto? 1,000%. Yeah, so that's 10 years. Okay, what about 5? I don't know where I would go as we rewind, but I remain a long-term optimist. I was in Silicon Valley for about 25 years. I moved a couple of years ago. But better technologies almost always win in the end. And I truly believe blockchain technologies are a path to reducing friction for financial transactions to the benefit of many industries. And the irony, and you and I were talking about this backstage a little bit, for some reason, crypto has become a little bit of a partisan issue. When I first came to Washington, and as Chris said, I've been coming here 4 or 5 years, it was a totally bipartisan issue. And for some reason, recently, it's come a little bit partisan towards Republicans being more open and constructive, saying, okay, let's pass this legislation. The irony to me around that is one of the core benefits around crypto, particularly around payments, are customers who can least afford the cost of remittances are actually burdened the most. So I'm talking about immigrant populations sending millions, billions of dollars into other countries, and they're paying, the World Bank would say 600 to 700 basis points. That's outrageous. Again, so for me, it's surprising that it is not more bipartisan and that we would have seen kind of something pass already. But again, I think there's still hope, and I think now that we have a Speaker of the House, maybe we'll make progress.
Maybe. They have to figure out, how to fund the government in the next 9 days as well. So they have quite a lot that they're dealing with. But to your point, if it doesn't happen this Congress with this lead of the House Financial Services Committee. Obviously, they've passed a few bills out of committee, stablecoin legislation, a market structure bill as well. If they can't get it done before the next election, what does that mean?
I don't really know. What I mean by that is I don't know that the presidential politics, I haven't heard either of Biden or Trump really speak about this. I mean, I think Trump once tweeted about Bitcoin or something years ago.
He would Truth Social it now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. But so I don't really have an opinion on that. I view this as a bipartisan issue. It's good for the United States to have constructive engagement with next generational exponential technologies that truly can have dramatically positive impacts on our economy, to the benefit of citizens. And the U.S., if you go back in the history books, the fact that the U.S. passed clear legislative solutions around the internet in the late 90s allowed massive amounts of capital and entrepreneurs. I mean, you think about that, I think we're hosted by AWS here. The largest, most important internet companies are based in the United States. The geopolitical benefit to the United States, not just economic, has been massive because we created the right environment for entrepreneurs and capital to flow into a next generational technology framework. Blockchain is a next generational technology framework. It is going to touch many, many industries. I would agree with people who say, well, right now there's too much speculation. I agree. We need more clear, constructive uses of these technologies to solve industry problems. But you're seeing more and more companies doing that, and you're seeing more and more traction. The United States should get behind that. We want these technologies to emanate here. We want to have that. And for whatever reasons, I think the SEC is part of the problem there. We have been hostile.
What you hear, and you talk about how this is becoming somewhat of a partisan issue. I've spoken with a lot of Democratic lawmakers, crypto skeptics about this, and they cite fraud often, that a lot of people are defrauded through crypto scams. Also things questioning whether or not blockchain ultimately really does anything new that can't be done already, that it's just trying to recreate something for no good reason and potentially bad things come with it. How much more work needs to be done to push back against that kind of narrative?
Well, I mean, the fraud point, and again, you and I talked a little about this backstage. The FTX fraud wasn't a crypto fraud. I mean, yes, it was a fraud. I don't know, it absolutely wasn't unique that this happened to crypto. There's other frauds that, in some cases, were even a bigger scale than what happened there. So, when I hear people say, "Well, we need legislative solutions around." To prevent FTX. It's like, well, maybe if Gary Gensler and the SEC weren't so focused on going after Ripple and meeting openly with Sam Bankman-Fried, maybe we could have actually avoided some of that, right? I don't know. I mean, Gensler won't comment on his meetings he had with SBF, so I don't really know what that's all about. But it strikes me those aren't the laws we need to clarify. Fraud laws are there, and there's many jurisdictions. You have Chair Benham from the CFTC. There's fraud. I mean, there's lots of ways you can address that. And obviously, Sam Bankman-Fried, I think, is probably going to go to jail. I know the sentencing hasn't happened.
Yeah. But guilty on all 7 counts.
Correct. So I don't think that's the core of the problem. I think, but to the other part of your problem, like the people who say there's not enough real utility, I mean, look, I kind of agree with that. There's a lot of excitement, and there should be. But that also was true in the earliest days of the internet. There's a birth, just an explosion of entrepreneurial activity that did result in the dot-com bust, but then you still have emerged from that Google and Amazon and Meta. There's no doubt in my mind these technologies, because they actually can be used to rewire how transactions happen. There's immense friction in how cross-border payments happen, where Ripple's focused. But there's immense friction in real estate, in bond settlement. There's ways to use these technologies. And by the way, I use those examples. Those aren't things Ripple's doing, but just it's more advocating for the industry at large.
Well, let's talk about Ripple, though, and the utility there. What's institutional adoption looking like
outside the United States? It's been great. I mean, look,
I'm sensing a theme here.
It was a dark time. When Ripple got sued December 22nd, 2020, Q1 of 2021, we didn't know what was going to happen. outside of the United States, regulators are like, we don't understand what the SEC is doing, and we continue to, 2021 and 2022 were some of our best years ever. The primary measure we use to measure growth is around payment volume. We went from doing tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billions of dollars of transactions at a time when we're in the middle of this massive lawsuit with the SEC. So other countries, again, have engaged constructively. They see how these technologies can be used to improve payment flows. They see how cross-border settlement works today. It's slow, it's expensive. I mean, actually, the head of the Italian central bank, I'm forgetting his name right now, he just wrote an opinion piece in the Financial Times about how broken cross-border payments are. It's 2023, and these are technologies that actually the U.S. is trying to stymie. It doesn't make sense.
So I know you always would rather focus on XRP utility rather than speculation, but do you have a thought on, I believe it's been bid up 30% in the last month?
Crypto overall has been up. I mean, Bitcoin hit a low of, I think, 16 or 17,000. Now it's, I think, at 35,000. XRP definitely has been on a rally. Look, if I had a magical window into what drives crypto prices, I probably would quit this job and just go do that. Look, I take a very long view. The big picture around these technologies, I'm very much a multi-chain viewpoint. Like, yes, XRP is extremely good at some use cases, and payments is clearly one. But I think there are lots of other blockchains that can be used for other purposes that it's not going to be one winner to take it all.
I'm already bracing myself for when I go check Twitter after this to see everything the XRP army had to say about this conversation.
There is a passionate advocate group. And
you could say that, yes.
Look, I think that is a good thing. There's obviously a very passionate advocate group around Bitcoin. I will say, and I say this to anyone who will listen, like the ideologues and the kind of the maximalism that happens in crypto, I think is counterproductive to crypto. And when I see people advocating of like, it's all Bitcoin or it's all XRP or stuff, I'm just like, no, it's not. And I think we all have to come together. And frankly, one of the silver linings of the Ripple case with the SEC has been the industry realizing like, this was important for the industry. Yes, it was great for Ripple, and frankly, it was nice for Brad Garlinghouse to have the case dropped. But like, it was important for the industry, and the Grayscale decision, I think it's incredibly important for the whole industry to come together and agree on things here in Washington to catalyze that legislative solution that we haven't yet seen.
All right, we're going to have to leave it on that note. Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, thank you so much. And with that, I have some words to say. We're going to turn to another regulatory conversation focused on a very different angle, and that would be from the CFTC. So for that, I'd like to welcome Chris back to the stage. He's going to be joined by the CFTC Chair, Ross Benham.